and let us all do we can to build a better future.
First, we're going to get into the big story this week. And the big story this week is that a federal judge has vacated the Centers for Disease Control's nationwide eviction moratorium. So I want to talk about this because the issues, I've been talking about this for a while. I've been predicting trouble, and the trouble that I was predicting seems to be coming together in the way I predicted it, and I'm very unhappy about this. But the situation is far more complex, in my view, than pundits on left or the right are making this out to be. So what happened was Centers for Disease Control a while back declared a nationwide moratorium on evictions for many people. Your income had to be below a certain level, and the eviction had to be due to the fact that you could not pay your rent. You could still be evicted for other things, like damaging the building, harassing your neighbors, noise complaints, other violations of the lease or the property rules. But it basically said if you couldn't pay your rent because of the global health emergency and you were at risk of homelessness, you could not be evicted. Now, this was a federal rule. States and municipalities enacted their own rules, which in many cases were even stricter about the conditions under which a person could be evicted or a family could be evicted from their home. What has happened, however, is a federal judge in Washington, D.C. Has basically ruled that the CDC overstepped its bounds. The CDC was not in a position to interfere with legally signed contracts, which is what leases are, whether it is a oral lease or a written lease or rental agreement, said you can't do that. And the Biden administration is currently protesting or is appealing this decision. And I also want to remind everybody that the CDC has basically said it's June 30th. At the end of June 30th, that rule expires. I have been predicting an eviction crisis for quite some time. We have talked about it countless times on this show. And I've also pointed out that the real estate fiasco that happened with the recession back in 2008 was a trial run. Many banks and lenders did not know how to manage foreclosed properties. I think at this point they figured out how to do it. And one of the things that I said is we were going to see a foreclosure crisis along with an eviction crisis. These are two separate things. Foreclosure is what happens when with a mortgage. If somebody owes money on a home, the homeowner defaults on the mortgage payments. There's a foreclosure process, but there's a separate eviction process to get the homeowner or the family out of the home. Eviction is the process of getting somebody out of their home, whether it's a rental home or whether they own it. In any case, I've been predicting this for a while. So let's go through what's happening here. The CDC rule has been vacated by a judge. If you are in a home right now and your housing is insecure, don't be intimidated by a landlord or a property manager at this time because the Biden administration is appealing this. And furthermore, state and local laws are protecting you right now. So you should be aware of that, but this is a good time to find out what emergency rules are in place in your area on the state and the local level. Tenants unions can help you. Legal aid societies can help you. That information is available to you. The reality is, though, is that this was going to expire in 6 weeks anyways. So this is what we're looking at right now. Wow. What I would like to point out is that this is a problem for a whole lot of people, and it's not just renters. And I realize that some people on the left regard landlords as parasites and pig dogs, and that need to get real jobs. The reality is that many landlords only own one or two properties. They do work full-time jobs as well as maintaining their properties. And at this point, there's a real risk of many landlords around the country going into foreclosure. And in fact, what I did, if you look at the show notes, I've got an article from the Washington Post detailing a struggle between a landlord and landlords and tenants that are going on right now, where landlords are themselves being pushed to the brink of financial ruin. Now, we can argue that housing is a right, and I believe that. I believe that there needs to be a community-based way of handling housing and managing housing so that everybody who wants to be in a home can get into a home regardless of income or disability or other concerns. I believe that, absolutely. But right now, there's a real risk of a bunch of small-time landlords and even medium-time landlords going into foreclosure. Now, one of the things that's been happening, and I predicted this a while back, and I was doing some digging, and this is back in September, Blackstone. Blackstone is the basically is this financial firm that went into rental housing when we had the housing crisis of 2008, the mortgage crisis. And they started buying up all kinds of single-family homes, and they also went in and they started buying apartments and that sort of thing. Well, they announced last September, right in the middle of all this, that they were getting back into the single-family home rental business.
Wow.
Yeah. And so they're prepped. They're ready to go. And if we start seeing these foreclosures happening, and we're at real risk of this happening, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau on May 4th put together a report indicating that mortgage borrowers are in real trouble. And that we are potentially looking at a cascading situation. But now there are firms and larger hedge funds, financial firms, they're not even organized as property management companies.
Wow.
That are poised to dive right in and to get these homes. Now, there's also an article from The Atlantic, which takes a slightly different tack, what the author of, she's from the Brookings Institution. One of the things that she points out is blaming large property owners for all of our property woes and our housing woes is probably not a good idea because there are other factors at play, including NIMBY laws where people don't want new development in their area, and that's causing its own set of problems. But she does point out that when a hedge fund or a financial firm takes over a bunch of properties, they are looking at short-term returns. They're not looking at the long game. When many people, including small-time landlords or even dedicated property developers or property management companies, take over rental housing, they're usually looking at long-term returns. But the hedge funds, financial firms are not. And that's a real problem because what can happen is they don't take care of the homes. They don't maintain the homes. They raise the rent. In fact, we had a guy, the head of Blackstone, was just recently boasting about being able to raise rents. And we're also looking at the real possibility that if they neglect properties for long enough, well, eventually they can be condemned. They can get the tenants out, and then they can, talk to a city council member or whatnot, get the zoning changed, and put a more profitable building up there and sell that.
Okay, so
what we're looking at here is the real possibility of scavengers coming in because this was not managed properly. The thing is, putting off rents, giving people financial cushions, that sort of thing, eventually those bills become due. If we had been receiving a basic income in this country during a global pandemic, maybe none of this would be happening.
Okay, so how many times are we going to sound like a broken record on this show? And again, 30 to 40 million Americans are at risk of being evicted. And the thing is, the evictions are still happening even as we speak. Maybe not in mass, but it looks like we are overdue for a disaster of which we are not truly prepared for. And the sad fact is that very few politicians are addressing this. And again, we're so close to getting to the 2022 midterm election cycle. Democrats, especially this is going to impact you the most, and to the vote blue no matter who crowd and K-Hive. What propaganda are you going to use to convince people to vote for you if we're looking at this amount, about 30 to 40 million Americans being evicted from their homes? What are you going to use to convince people that, oh, wait, we care? You're allowing this to happen. This is going to take place. We saw this in 2008 under Barack Obama and Joe Biden's presidential administration. So Biden-Harris administration, What are you going to do to address this problem and stop it before it gets out of hand? Because again, 30 to 40 million Americans, they have friends, family, loved ones who are voters. And those voters, including that 30, 40 million that were evicted, who are also maybe potential voters as well, they're going to remember who turned a blind eye and just let this happen. Again, we're not out of this pandemic yet, but this is something that should not happen at all. Why is it that we're seeing this story happen here in the United States, whereas in other countries, they don't have this problem? They're not kicking their people out on the streets. Now, again, I'm pretty sure those countries have their own fair share of problems too, because there's no such thing as perfection. But in the richest country in the world, we cannot provide safety and security for its citizens. What a joke.
And I also want to point out that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau makes this point. Borrowers in forbearance or delinquent are disproportionately Black and Hispanic. For example, 33% of borrowers in forbearance and 27% of delinquent borrowers are Black or Hispanic, while only 18% of the total population of mortgage borrowers are Black or Hispanic. And this is this again is showing against wealth, which has been hard gotten by those populations, is slipping through their fingers at this point. And furthermore, what happens is when you have delinquencies and forbearances and foreclosures on your credit record, it makes it harder for you to, say, even get a rental apartment after you lose your home. Wow. It can make it harder for you to get a job or even favorable insurance rates.
My goodness. Again,
so this is, it's like when, and this is affecting people of all races. But when white people get the sniffles, Black and brown people tend to get the flu.
Wow.
Camera's having fun there.
Yeah, camera is having fun here at Heartland's meeting.
Even our cameras have fun.
Even our cameras have fun. But this is not fun. I mean, this is, we're seeing there's been a lot of talk about this. We've heard about how women have lost their gains in the workplace because they've moved into childcare and homeschooling, which is understandable, but we don't really have job security in this country. And now we're looking at the potential for Black and Hispanic individuals in this country not, potentially losing their homes and losing the one path to wealth building that average people have in this country. It's really upsetting.
So this goes back to, what I would talk a lot about with Obama, how, you can argue whose fault it is or whatever, but Black wealth has never was lower in American history, going all the way back to emancipation than when the 2008 crisis happened. That's for the exact reason that LAINIE just put out there. The people that were given the most risky loans because someone had to buy that house were at the African American population. And so when that happened and they lost all that money that they had been saving to get that house, well, that was a bit of a disaster. And now we're going to be, and as LAINIE already pointed out again, that was the first time that the banks had really gotten into having to deal with that hedge funds had gotten into having to deal with that. Now they're ready. Now they are ready. And again, just like LAINIE said, just like what we've been saying, it was a giant mistake to just push back those payments because at some point they're going to be due and you're not going to be able to pay them in this economy. So even if you started today getting to a point where you can start paying back, if your rent, I don't know where this is, but if your rent is $500 a month and all of a sudden you can start paying back $1,000 a month, you're still going to be screwed if you didn't have the money to pay in for 10 months. And so what's going to happen is as soon as people can, because everyone's right now giving the same reasonable response based on their situation. I can't pay. The pandemic took my job. I don't know what you want out of me. You can't kick me out right now. I'm trying. I'll pay you as soon as I'm able to. But again, most Americans before the pandemic started had, $400 or $500 in their savings account, half of Americans. So imagine that when we're supposed to have a good economy, people have that much in savings and they're able to just barely pay up. You can't pay half a year's rent if you could barely make it by month to month. So what's going to happen is as soon as this goes on, Biden is trying to fight it. Of course, courts move incredibly quickly. I'm being sarcastic, obviously. So even if Biden gets a victory out of saying, no, 6 weeks is fine, it's already going to be expired by the time this gets resolved. I can't think of a situation where it'll even matter. Like, even if in a month he's able to get the courts to go, no, you're right, that's still 2 weeks left. And what's Biden going to do? Just extend? Then we get to all the problems that ladies brought up as well, with the fact that a lot of people, we're not talking about the large corporate consolidated apartment blocks. We're talking about the mom and pop, the duplexes, people that are adding in, supplementing their income for rent, which is, again, just like large businesses versus small businesses. There's a lot of those people out there, and they're going to get screwed if Biden keeps kicking this down the road. The correct solution was always from the beginning, pay off the debt, give people UBI. And we're America, so of course we didn't do that.
And the thing of it is, we proved that we could do it. Remember how they suddenly changed all those unemployment rules?
Yep.
Suddenly, gig workers and freelancers were getting unemployment benefits. People were suddenly getting that extra $600.
Yeah.
All of these changes were being made. I got my second jab yesterday in the country where we don't believe in government health care. I went in and had, on both occasions, the smoothest process I have ever had for receiving any kind of health care. I was in and out in 20 minutes.
Wow.
And didn't have to show an insurance card, didn't have to pay for anything. We have shown in this country that we can change things. We can make modifications. We can adapt when we have to. And strangely enough, this is one area where we haven't done it. Mm-hmm. The one thing that could keep people in their homes, to prevent a foreclosure crisis, to prevent an eviction crisis. Remember, those are two separate things. They're two separate things. And keep in mind, as Daniel pointed out, a lot of the landlords who may be losing their properties in this entire mess, that may also be their retirement.
Yeah.
And that was what they were hoping for in their retirement. And again, for those of you on the left who don't approve of landlording, I understand your position to the extent that I believe that housing is a right. But the reality is, this is the system that we're currently working under. And you're looking at the real possibility of a whole lot of people in this country suddenly becoming homeless or precariously housed or losing their wealth so they cannot afford to retire, or they will be in poverty after they retire. And we're going to have to live with those consequences, regardless of your opinion regarding landlording and rental property. It is a serious situation. I'm also going to point out something we have discussed on this show, as we're going to transition to another topic here. Mm-hmm. But one of those things is when people feel like they have nothing left to lose and somebody's coming to their door to evict them, we may very well see an increase in certain forms of in crime. Yeah. People are going to have a violent reaction. This has been known to happen in the past, and we know that there have been a lot of people who we're having a mental health crisis in this country right now. Yeah. And you have somebody who's in extreme distress. They are being evicted. They've lost everything. Again, this could be a very dangerous and disruptive situation, and I'm hoping that somebody will have the foresight to put a stop to it now and say, hey, we made mistakes. We are going to correct this.
And just a reminder that, as we've talked about now that we've dug this hole that we're in, the only way to do that is for en masse Joe Biden, of all people, to go, we're going to cover your rent. I think that is unlikely. The thing that he's more likely to do is continue kicking this down the road. However, I always like to look at what the big players are doing. And as LAINIE, you just mentioned, they seem really confident that they should be gearing up right now. And I'm sure that they probably know a little bit more about what Joe Biden's planning than we do. So if all the hedge funds in Wall Street are gearing up to do foreclosure moves and gearing up to take all these homes over, my inclination is Biden's not going to kick this back much further.
Final note on this. Debt forgiveness is necessary now for the people. Democrats, you can do good if you choose to, but knowing Washington, D.C., knowing politics and how long we've covered it, the only people that are going to save us right now is ourselves, and that's why we all have to work together.